Alrighty, we're gonna get started. Woo! So welcome to Oxide Games presents Thingies Wrong with Procedural Games, or Procedural Games, threat or menace, because it's true. Just to kind of briefly start off, I'm Michelle. I do systems design. I'm the lead designer at Oxide. I like spreadsheets.
I'm Dan. I'm a pixel wizard. I like that. Pixel is a self-proclaimed panel eye candy. So I'll probably be somewhat quiet here. I do graphics, not as much game design.
You did say you wanted to be the panel booth babe.
But I'm the booth babe. So.
Paul Murphy, writer kind of person, and apparently curmudgeonly. I think we can all agree on that.
And even though there's not a slide on this, let me tell you a little bit about Oxide. We're about 5.5 years old. Oxide Games was founded by a lot of the development leads from Civilization 5, and we actually have a number of people who work on Civilization 5 at our company. So we have a huge, long background in Civilization 6 too, in procedural games.
And you worked on 4 too, right?
And 3.5.
3.5, yeah. So even though we're a newer studio, we have enormous experience in this.
And Ashes.
Yep.
Yeah. So just to kind of make sure we're on the same page, you know, what is a procedure game? When we say this thing, what are we talking about? Cool. Awesome. So we'll tell you. There is no such thing. Like, totes, fight me, brah. Because, like, you know, really, think about it. When we use the word procedural game, often what we're talking about is there is a game that uses one or more procedural systems. The game itself is not procedural. That would be kind of amazeballs if that were true, but think about it. You still have designers who make the systems and the algorithms. Someone sat there on their butt at a computer and typed in some rules and how this game is going to work, how it's going to play. They're going to still balance a lot of it by hand. Programmers still created an engine, you know, sitting in their chair with their computer. They had to, like, you know, write all the shaders. Like, we don't have computers that are doing all of that naturally procedurally by hand. No. Artists. Yes, there are some procedural art things out there like Substance Painter and Designer. They're doing great things. You can't make your whole game out of Substance Painter. I'm going to make a stand and say that right now. Prove me wrong. Challenge accepted. Yes, sir. But so, yes, we're not at the point yet where a procedural game is actually reality. Examples of what are procedural systems in games, obviously there's Minecraft and the terrain system. Totes awesome. There's Civilization with its terrain system. Looks pretty good. I tried to find a prettier picture, but I failed. There's No Man's Sky with its terrain system. This one's very red. There's Endless Runners with its terrain system levels. You know, it's close enough. But you notice there tends to be a common theme in a lot of these games. Then there are some ones like Spore with their life forms, and No Man's Sky to some extent, but not really as successful in my opinion. So yes, there are other things. The items in Diablo.
Like Diablo.
The Borderlands, alien races to some extent in Stellaris. So there are other areas where procedural systems are used, but typically you most commonly find them in your map building. So to kind of break up this talk, rather than sort of discuss something that in great detail, because that would then take up the entire talk, we could just talk for an hour about procedural terrain systems. We thought that might not be as applicable to everybody, so instead we're going to kind of hit up some basic areas at a more high level, and then if you want to ask questions and like drill down, we'll do it that way. So we'll hit up some stuff with what are issues with procedural systems in particular with game balance and content creation, like how can you use it, how can you use it poorly, because more often than not, you're going to use it poorly. This is hard to do well. Very easy to implement, hard to do well. Paul is going to riff on narrative and storytelling, how you could perhaps make that procedural, and then I don't know.
I'll talk.
So he might or may not do something. And we're not going to hit Bart Naughty because obviously we have no one here. And just because this is meta, like for realsies, I use the procedural design layout thing in PowerPoint to lay out every single one of these slides. So all these images, like right here, like this shit, PowerPoint picked those things out on its own. It was like, I found this image. Would you like to use it? Okay. Here's the layout. It created the chevron. I didn't do any of this art or shit. It did all of this on its own. So sometimes we're going to see...
Yeah, it's really creepy. I found the Civ 5 picture, too.
Okay, now some of the actual pictures I found, but like all the clip art shit, it did. But like even these like layouts, like it did all this. It was like, oh, you are going to create all this fancy like smart art? It's getting good. Scary good. Art director was like, fucking hell, I have no job anymore. So he's like, oh, I'll make your presentation pretty. He's like, God damn it! I was like, so on that note, we'll start with balance concerns and content creation. So this is one area where it failed. I don't know what that is.
I think that's
black bowler hat into this.
I think that's the sun rising.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not sure.
I don't know. PowerPoint's like this, and if you use it on like, because usually if you've ever used it, it'll give you like 10 different options in the designer layout. You're like, and it used it on all of them. You're like, you're really confident about this image. Okay, let's roll with it. Yeah. So.
Balance?
I don't know. Maybe it's a button. I still think it's a bowler hat. I don't know. So why would you want to make procedural design content? Because I'm the designer. Isn't that my job?
Did it find that art for you too?
No, I found it.
Okay.
But it laid it out. It did, however, crop it and lay it out, and that's like,
okay.
Yeah, it did all that on its own, though. I was like, oh, good, cool, that was nice. So, yeah, it's like, I thought that was my job, was to make all the decision and the ideas, otherwise why are they paying me all this money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Could replace it.
No, you don't want to replace me. So one area where it's actually quite useful is when you build these item creation systems that involve combinatorics. You can absolutely do this by hand if you are a crazy person or hate your junior designers. By all means, then make them hate their lives. So let's do a little short example. So let's say you want to create a game like maybe Diablo, which has a whole bunch of weapons, and you want to have this whole idea where like, part of the game is exploring and finding new, unique weapon combinations you've never seen before. So let's just start up some new, like some simple rules to guide this. So we've got 15 weapon types. That seems reasonable. Like we've got some maces, some axes, some staves, some swords. Normal weapons, let's choose 15. Great, we'll have that for launch. We'll expand upon this later because we're crazy. Let's just talk about some axes though. So out of all of these axes, each item can have 10 different prefixes and different suffixes. So like, the rabbit axe of dwarf slaying or the lightweight staff of wind magic because, ooh, that means they're specialized and they're useful in certain situations. Cool, I can make a list of 10 items and a list of 10 items. That's pretty straightforward. Awesome. All right, now let's also put some power modifiers on the end. So it's like rabbit axe of dwarf slaying -5. It's not quite so good as the +9 dwarf slaying rabbit axe. So now you got this, ooh, do I want this one or this one? And I can have some little itty-bitty progressions. I'm not done yet. So maybe, we also want to have the axes be able to level up and we can invest in our favorite axe and make it even more awesome towards the end. So maybe, I don't know, between 1 and 50 levels. I think that actually sounds pretty reasonable. I mean, 100 is obviously out of the question, but 50, why not? So let's talk about the number of possible axes we have. That's a lot of axes. I didn't realize out of those little simple numbers, 10 and 10, fuck, 100,000 axes. Ooh, do you really want to enter data for 100,000 axes by hand? You're a crazy man, I'll hire you. Crazy man. Oh! So, that's a lot. But I'm not done because I got to make it more complicated, because why not? And don't forget, we actually want our axes to have special abilities too, like, maybe...
Talking to you.
Sorry.
Yes,
so like maybe we'll have a pool of, 10 or 20 abilities, but we're going to pick between 1 and 4 and apply those to the axe as well. Crap! Now we have to take all that into account. We're going to actually do some combinatorics now. What are the different variations for each possible axe? Ooh, so for each unique axe, there are now 385 possible ability combinations. That's a lot of axes. Do you still want to enter those by hand? Where are you, crazy man?
Wait.
No, never know. How many weapons do we have now? Oh! Do you want to enter that by hand? No. So this is one place where procedural content generation is actually quite useful. So you're still designing all of these, unique ideas and abilities, but thank God you're not making this stuff by hand. So I also think, what if you wanted to change it to be levels 1 through 60? And you did it by hand. Have fun.
Please say PowerPoint found that picture.
No.
Because that would have been awesome.
It did the whole,
I would have had super high respect if it found that picture.
That would have been good, right? And just to clarify this point, that there is a difference between procedural content and random content. So our example right there was definitively procedural. We gave it a list of rules and definitions and an algorithm, and then the game creates the items based on all the little rules we gave it. It's going to create these things from scratch as we need them at runtime. So terrain generated at runtime is another good example. There are rules for where can a desert tile be placed in conjunction to a mountain tile in conjunction with an ice block or something. There are rules guiding this, and then the game, using this algorithm rule set, will build a procedural map at runtime using your input. Random is a little bit different. Think of that more as you've got a whole bunch of possible lists of hand-designed pieces. You've got a tile deck of pre-made tiles, and it's just now going to randomly pick one of that deck and throw it out. So it's more of a loop table rule. You're not really changing what is in that tile deck at runtime ever, you're just randomly picking which tile came off first. That would be random, not procedural. So you'll see in a lot of these games that use procedural maps and procedural terrain and level layouts, they'll actually use a combination of the two together to create a more interesting experience, and that is actually a great way to use procedural content in your games. It's like, lay out the level procedurally, but then start to pull in some more hand-designed features to actually make sure that it's going to be balanced well, that you're providing an interesting experience, and not just completely, totally procedurally good. Because one of the problems is, when you're working on this, it's like if you've got a base, like map, say, procedure generated, that's fine. It becomes a bit more interesting when you've got levels, and you're starting to deal with things like difficulty. So this is the Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, that guy, his flow state. So he wrote a book back in 1971, and that was like his seminal work describing how people basically enter immersion states and flow states. And he found that basically you could map challenges on the y-axis and skills on the x, and that magic thing in the middle where challenge is appropriate to skill will keep people immersed in whatever task they're doing. He wasn't writing about this in relation to games. This was more of just a general psychological thing. The man is not a game designer. He's a psychologist. And that you'll find people get bored with the task they're given once their skills outweigh the challenge presented, and conversely, they'll become more anxious and get very frustrated and angry with the task if it's too hard for their current skill level. So this is a good way to think about what are you trying to do with balance. That you're trying to hit that flow channel. So you're trying to measure and guess basically where, well, we used to guess, now we measure, where a player's skill is over the course of an entire game experience, like across levels, across all this, and then try to give an appropriate challenge level to where they are. That's hard when you're procedurally generating all the shit they're playing on, because where are they? Oh, they could be anywhere. And if you actually wanted to look up his book, it's short. It's about, oh yeah, yay big, it's a good read. That's how you spell his name, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah.
What nationality is it?
European. I don't remember.
That name was procedurally generated.
It was not! It's a name!
It does look like it, doesn't it?
So offensive!
They need to work on their procedure a little bit.
Boo!
I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
You are in trouble. So, the other big area where people like to use procedural content is for this flow state. How do you create procedurally enhanced balance, basically, to make sure that your players are always having an enjoyable, correct challenge level experience? So, this is actually kind of hard to do, especially if you're trying to, say, hit a large target audience or a wide kind of demographic. If you have a game that's tailored to a very specific core group of people, it's a little easier to balance for them because you know exactly how they think, exactly what they're expecting. But if your game is, say, something like Civ, where the ASRB rating is 10+, that's kind of hard to do. So a 10-year-old, what they need and what they expect and what appropriate level for a challenge for a 10-year-old is vastly different from a 14, an 18-year-old, a 40-year-old, and then even an 80-year-old where you start to go back down again in some cases. So it's what do you do? How do you... How do you properly nail that?
Go on, please continue.
All right, so remember, but we're procedural. What do we do? Stop. So there are a couple of different ways you can approach this idea to more procedurally help to balance. Not all of this is actually procedural. These are just ways to then approach these challenges. So one step is, look, don't do it. You know what? Difficulty, screw it. Some games, you know what? That's fine. It's seriously, think about it. What is the difficulty skill level balance curve of Minecraft? Modes are different. You would choose that on the inner game. But as you're playing, and you get better and you're exploring your world, does the difficulty change? Do the monsters, do the skeletons start swinging harder? No, not really. But you know what? For Minecraft, that's okay. That's not the point of combat is not the point of Minecraft. If you're playing Minecraft to kill things, that's an interesting choice. I mean, this is about exploration. It's about building. It's about crafting. It's about creation. What is the skill level of that? How do you measure that? Do you want to measure that? No, not really. Just let them go play with their virtual Legos. It's fine. You don't need to always overthink your problem. So sometimes, don't even do it. The next thing you can try to do is setting difficulty levels, which is sort of akin to a mode, but more of what Civ does. So literally what Civ does, where at the beginning of the game, you're I want Chieftain Easy Butt mode, or I want, what the fuck are you playing on?
Emperor. Which one's below deity? One or
I don't know. I don't play the high. I play on Prince, and I'm happy there. Sometimes King.
Yeah.
That's about as high as I go. Then I stop having fun. My anxiety level's like, I don't want to think that much.
I think it's
during
I think it's immortal.
Immortal?
It's
Okay.
like deity and then immortal.
Yeah, so basically what with these set difficulty levels, you are setting in advance as the game starts, set handicaps, set bonuses, usually typically with the AI to make them harder to beat because they're cheaty little assholes. And that does not change as the game goes on. So it is irrespective of player skill or skill progression as the game goes on. It's just, this is the difficulty curve line of this game. And if you want to set it new, a lot of games will make you restart. Some games now will let you change the difficulty on the fly, like that game that Tom Chick was being very upset about last week.
That could describe any game.
Yes, that's right.
No, you like lots of things. So, I'm not a super fan of set difficulty levels in general. Sad panda. I mean, for some cases it's fine, but it feels like you should maybe try something first, and if you really can't make it work, it's a fine fallback. But there are things you can do better than just setting an arbitrary level and saying this is where we are. Even a game like Thea makes it better, where instead of having just like easy, medium, hard, they've got little slider axes for like all the major systems and let you actually choose. Like, well, I actually want the combat to be harder. I'm really bad at the econ game. Let's push this down a little. Speed here, so you can actually tailor the experience exactly where you want, which is kind of cool. And they do have some presets that kind of give you some guidelines. And then for the leaderboards, they'll actually change your final like points calculation as a multiplier based on where you put all those sliders in the end. So it's kind of a neat little way to set your own little challenge difficulty with a little bit of like direction. Woo! That's hard to read. You screwed up, PowerPoint, but I let it go. So ramping difficulty is something that you see a lot in like arcade games. So something like Space Invaders or Pac-Man, where each level gets a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder, until the goal of the level is to murder you in the face. Because arcade games want your money. And it does no good to them if you are very good at this forever and never give them another quarter. So it's sort of like the other version where there are these set bars and like this is the difficulty, but you just ramp it up every single time the level goes up. And it is, again, irregardless of player skill or how they're changing in skill. It's not great all the time. Sometimes for things like Endless Runners, like the arcade games, it is what you want. So the kind of overarching point of all these things over and over again is really be cognizant of what your game is, what it's trying to do, and who its audience is, and make sure you're tailoring your balance and like how you're incorporating balance with your procedural systems in a way that makes sense for your game. Just because, Temple Run did it this way does not mean you do it that way. I don't care how much it sold; it doesn't matter. You're not making that game. Water break. So, another thing you can do. Yes, Blue Turtle Shell is following you. It never follows me. I suck at racing games. I don't have this problem. It's true. There's a reason why we're not in that game, competition thing. Like, oh, we're playing Mario Kart. Like, I don't think you're going to be laughed at this. So negative feedback loops are a balance that you can do where basically you're introducing something to destabilize the current game state of the system. So Blue Turtle Shell will only ever heat sink go find the person in the lead. It is there to destabilize the status quo of the game state, which then gives everyone else in the back a chance to catch up. Because when you played, Blue Turtle Shell basically punches you in the face and makes your car go rolling off like, ah, and you're like, I'm not winning anymore. And then in the process of you doing this, you're probably going to hit number 2 and 3 players. And so they're all like, ah, I'm not winning anymore. And then all of us in the back are like, I have a chance to catch up. Yay! Yeah. In comparison, a positive feedback loop is something that would reinforce the game state. So you'll see this a lot in RTSs where you're like, want the match to end quickly. So the person who is winning, they get some more bonuses. They collect things faster. That's a positive feedback loop because it reinforces the current game state, who is winning versus who is losing. So that is something you could, yeah, material stuff. Nice. So these are actually really, really useful. Is it fine? There's a lot of hatred for Blue Turtle Shell, but think about what the point of Mario Kart is. It's a party game. It's a family game. If Dad always wins, little Timmy gets upset, so it gives little Timmy a chance to be competitive until he gets better to beat Dad in the face at racing. The hard thing about negative feedback loops is actually figuring out what is that right heuristic to use. Like, what is the right system to change? You know you want to destabilize it so that the winner isn't always the winner. You want to make it competitive. You want to make it so there's always a chance that anyone can win until the very end. How do you do that? There is no one-size-fits-all thing. I wish I could tell you there is an easy thing to always do this. It's untrue. If someone tries to tell that to you, they are trying to sell you something, and they are dirty liars. You tell them, no, sir, go away. But really what you're trying to do is just in the most general sense possible, because I can't go more, like if you have a specific question, by all means, that's a specific question, but think about your challenge curves, your progression curves, and through play testing and AI testing and telemetry and data gathering, figure out where are these patterns I'm finding and start to develop your heuristics that way. It's a great thing to do, but it is, again, hard, and it takes a lot of time and iteration to get it right. This isn't something you can just do in the last 2 weeks before launch and say it'll work and be fine. And why these are also great as far as with proceduralness is you don't have to know where the player is. You don't have to know really where they are. The heuristics you developed with your algorithms are going to help you with that. Yay! You don't have to care about the current game state when you're developing this because the game will handle that for you. Woohoo! And then there's this. Oh, this.
I'll find that picture.
Yeah. So, like, you know, the sexiness of dynamic difficulty adjustment. Ooh, and yes, PowerPoint, I don't know what happened. It did that, and I was like, well, here's an example where procedural is not always working. I don't understand what happened there.
Looks like a glitch.
It did it actually on a few occasions. So dynamic difficulty adjustment is basically where your balance isn't something static you decided beforehand. It's dynamic. Ooh. Yeah, I know, right? That's real. I told you a lot there with that. So basically, it's related or similar to the previous idea, but takes it a step further. So, you know, basically the game is tracking the player's progress, again, across a line of heuristics and determining what their actual performance is. It's trying to create a way to objectively measure the player's performance along certain axes. So, like, you know, if it's a shooter, how well are they aiming? How often are they hitting? Like, you know, with the, like, you know, hits that shot that actually hit the dude versus hits the wall. How often are they making headshots? How often are they getting hit? So all these things are like that would define players' performance with some kind of numerical value. Then from there, you create an algorithm that would then take those numbers and then rebalance and adjust the difficulty of related systems. So for something like, you know, is that the player is always hitting the enemy well and doing a lot of headshots, you're probably going to want to maybe adjust the enemies to have more hit points or to dodge more because you want to make it harder for that player to have, like, you know, give him some more challenge because obviously he's very good at this. Whereas for me, when I'm like, herp, derp, twitch skill, they're like, please stand still so I can aim my little reticule and then hit you because that's where my level is for this. So it wouldn't matter then where the player is, how good they are at the beginning, how long it takes them to ramp up their skill. The game will adjust dynamically at runtime, always, to adjust itself to that particular player's skill level across those defined heuristics. And then again, with, like, you know, wide levels of demographics, it's great. 10-year-old gets his own perfect little experience, 40-year-old gets his perfect experience, grandma gets her perfect experience. Perfect, right? So why aren't we always doing that now? Anyway, this sounds like this would solve all our problems when we use procedural systems in our games. It's really, really, really hard to do well. Oh my God, it's so easy to do poorly. So easy. It always looks so good on paper. Like, this will be the best thing ever. Rubber banded! Who's ever played a race game where you're like, I'm doing great, and then out of nowhere, all the AI racers shoot off like they've got, like, nitro crazy engine. Like, where the hell did they come from? There's nothing you can do to catch up to them. You're like, well, that was immersion breaking and dumb and lame. Or if you're like me, you're like really terrible, they all, like, literally put their brakes on and they're just like, Grandma Drive, and you're like, yeah, Mario Kart. So it's really easy to break as well and game the system. That's no good, really inconsistent and unbelievable. Here's two examples of level scaling. Again, looks great on paper. That first example is Oblivion with the most amazing level, like, you know, leveled up road bandit who wants your 2 coppers ever. But you're like, dude, go sell your armor and retire forever and enjoy your money. Why are you mugging me? This makes no sense. And if you've ever played Oblivion and leveled up your character, you will have run into this man. And it actually broke the game, like story progression-wise, because there were quests that became unbeatable. Since what it did was it looked at your level, and it level scaled up all the enemies based on your level. Great, there was always a challenge level. Bad. So not only did you ever feel like a badass, and what's the point of an RPG with a progression system? At some point, you want to feel like a badass. Like, I'm That rat was painful by level 1, and now I'm pounding bandits in the face with one-hit kills. That feels awesome. With this kind of system, no, that rat is still going to kick you in the face at level 100. You're like, what is this mutant monster rat? Ah! No good. And then with quests that would require certain enemies, another thing they did was they would actually take out certain enemies at all. So, like, wolves would disappear after, like, level 50. If you didn't do those quests that required wolf pelts, oh, well, you're not getting wolf pelts anymore in the game because wolves no longer resist in your role because you're all too scary for wolves. Final Fantasy VIII, which is one of my favorite games in the world, Fight Me, also had this level scaling problem where the enemies were based on an average of your party level, so you could game the system hard, and I did. Every single boss battle, I'd have my 2 level 100s, and I'd bring in Selfie, who I never played with, and she's like level 20. And the boss's level would go, derp, 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 derp. And it didn't matter if Selfie died. I didn't care if my 2 level 100s were like, death everywhere! Totally game-breaking. Totally game-breaking. So,
That sounds fun to me.
super easy to implement. Not good. Don't do it. There have been cases where it has been done when I bet you didn't even notice it. So that first one is Half-Life 2. Guess what? Those health rates, they were dynamically adjusted based on your current health. And most people never noticed. So if you had a whole lot of health, you would get little health things, like +5, +6, little things. If you were near death, they would throw in some bigger stuff to, like, make you feel like you could keep going, keep playing. Max Payne, they did aim assistance, and they messed with the enemy health bars based on how you were doing, and it was very subtle, which is why it worked. Most people didn't even know what was happening, but it made the game fun and enjoyable. It felt like you were always being competitive. So I'm not saying you can't do it, but you have to be very, very careful. So first thing first is don't try to hit up every single system with some kind of DDA thing because it just won't work. Pick 1 or 2 things you think will have the biggest payoff, and usually you're going to find that through playtesting. And be very clear about what those systems are, what the benefit of making that balanced decision procedural versus static is. Because while you could do it, should you? Is there a reason for it in your game? I can't tell you that, but really think about it. And which systems would actually be hurt by it? By, like, for example, the rubber banding. That is hurt by bad dynamic adjustment. Understand the cost implications because, yes, you might need more art. You might need way more QA testing to make sure this thing is balanced. This is not free. It may save you time, but cost your team way more in resources. Be mindful of that. Start small. Don't try to do everything in your game. Pick one tiny little system. If it's your first time trying, and just work on that little thing. It's okay. Even that one little thing can make it a much better experience. And then test it so hard. Like, don't just run it a few times and be like, oh, it worked for me. Put it through the ringer like crazy. This might add, like, additional, like, months of testing time to your game. Be realistic about that. This is not a cheap, easy solution. It can be very, very effective, but it's not cheap or easy. So with that knowledge, go forth carefully and try to use procedural things in your, like, balance and content creation. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul to yammer at you from the softer side of life.
Pretty soft, thank you.
I'm going to move over you now. Whee! Does Dan have anything to add yet?
Dan?
What? Dan's paying attention. It's all good.
Okay, I've never given this talk in public, so it's going to be pretty interesting. I'm not terrified of level adjusting for the audience. I'm Paul Murphy. I've been a writer and game designer for like 35 years. This does predate the invention of fire. Also, mostly personal computers, except for, like, the Sinclair and things. I started work in paper games with games like working for a company called West End. What? Okay, where did the... I'm really not saying anything that important. Yeah, so I started in paper games, working on role-playing products like Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Paranoia. And then I moved over to computers once they were invented. And I worked at Microprose, AOL, Firaxis, Zynga, and other places. A lot of that work was in procedural type games, particularly in the sort of Firaxis, Microprose period, when I worked on bunches of Civilization. So here's a question for us. What is narrative? Now, we're legally required to ask that question in a talk, even though everyone in here knows what narrative is already. It's just the rule. We have to ask what narrative is.
Also, I wanted to use that picture of the giant pencil because it was redonkulous.
Right. So narrative is storytelling. Yay. In case you were not sure. And this is more
Yeah.
procedural layout design here, which will
I don't know why I kept doing it.
Michelle's quite happy with that.
It does fill me with joy, won't I?
Okay, in games, we have a bunch of different ways that we can tell a narrative, we can provide narrative to the player. They include cutscenes that you have to watch because we did all this work on them and spent all this money.
So no
And
skip button for you.
You don't get to skip this. You have to watch it. And you have to like it. Thank you. Then we have diaries, even though no one alive ever actually keeps a diary anymore. They appear in games all the time. Yeah, I know this may seem implausible, but I know a guy who kept a detailed calendar about every single thing he did over summer vacation.
I'm gonna murder you.
And it turned out to be very useful to him. Yeah, sorry.
Too soon.
Yeah, okay, and dialogue that you have to step through. You got to do all of this stuff to get the narrative out of the game. You may not particularly want to read my deathless prose, but you pretty well have to, because I can control that. And we have cutscenes, again, lots of them. And you're going to look at them because they cost a lot of money. Half of the narrative work in game design is figuring out ways to force you to look at my cutscenes.
Not your personal ones.
Well, no, yeah. And of course we have voiceovers, because that's like nothing really enhances the reality of a game than having a voice speak in your ear telling you what you think.
And the best is when it's reading the text on screen to you. My
Yes.
favorite.
Yes, I plan to do that later, just for fun. So we have your basic. This is your basic setup for a linearish game. You've got your opening cutscene, then you've got some things that happen, and then another thing that happens, and another thing that happens, and then you have the finale, and you're done. This is very good for us writers because we can present you the same kind of game, the same kind of story that you would read in a book, which is also kind of sequential. If you want to get a little less narrative, then we can go into a linearish game like this, in which you have plenty of decisions, but they all lead back to the same kind of choke points. And again, we want you to see our information because we spent all this money on it.
Otherwise, why are we paying you?
Exactly? Why are you paying me to write
And these cutscenes are really expensive.
Yeah, like,
They're
we're not
getting
joking.
millions and millions of dollars. So like, yeah, we want you to watch them.
So
Yeah,
again,
like the opening movie for Civ 5, so we didn't have traditional cutscenes. That opening movie was a quarter of our budget.
right,
So that's what we're talking about.
right,
Yeah,
So-
you better watch it.
Yeah, you gotta watch it. It's glorious.
right. So, but in a game like this, you of course have got player decisions, but they all lead back to the same point. And you have to. We don't care what order you kill the dwarfs at, but you're going to kill the dwarfs, and then after you finish killing the dwarfs, we'll give you the next plot point that allows you to go kill the orcs. That's the way a standard product works. Now, in a procedural game, we got some problems. Well, part of the problem, or part of the benefits in a linear game is that when you die, you come back and try again from where you left off. So if after choke point A, I'm in the next group and I die, I don't have to see the opening cutscene or choke point A graphics anymore because I've already seen that. I'll be brought back to life at whatever point the monster shot me in the face, and I'll move on forward. So that even as the game progresses, I will again progress it in terms of a novel. But in a procedural game, you don't know where the player is going. You don't know what he's doing. You've got your big opening cutscene at the start, and then you don't know. Is the player going to go explore? Is the player going to build a mighty empire? Is the player going to be a warmonger? We don't know. What we do know is that there are plenty of places where the player will be making decisions that you have no control over. And even worse, the player may die and restart the game. So if if you played Civilization, you know that each time you die and restart, you get that little tiny block of text telling you about the story of your leader and his civilization. And after about the fourth time, you want to put your fist through the computer. Yeah, I wrote that. Sorry, it should have been shorter. So, the question is, can your brilliant cutscene stand up to multiple viewings? every time you die, let's just say we give you some art, give you a nice cutscene. Do you think players want to see that over and over and again each time they die? No, they don't. Nobody wants to see it. No, you may want to see it once or twice, but that's about it. So, how do we take care of this? How do we add narrative to a procedural nightmare of our player choices restarting a non-real player? We have a couple of choices. We can create a fully fleshed out narrative and, ignoring the player's actions and choices, just jam it down their throat.
People do this.
It is.
People
It
choose
happens a lot of
this.
time. It happens a lot, yes. We love that kind of thing. So, why is this awful? First of all, we have no control over pacing. We could make it, how do we know when to show you the pieces when we don't know what you're doing? We could make it based on time, but that fails for a number of reasons. What am I here? Good
I don't
Lord.
know.
I know, I can't read anymore. The restart problem, we already talked about that a bit. If every time you restart, we want to show you our story, you're going to hate us, and I don't blame you. Why not procedurally generated narrative, like the map is procedurally generated?
That is the correct response, sir. You win.
Yes, exactly.
Because literally.
Right. We don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea how to make procedurally generated narrative. It's hard. What do you do? How do you create blocks of paragraphs and have the computer pick them at random? That seems kind of
I think I saw
awful.
a Star Trek episode when the holodeck and they accidentally created like an evil AI, like trying to do this problem. So.
It surprised me a bit.
Yeah.
But there are some ideas out there that we can work from. Mad Libs, which is where you have a wonderful pre-cut story, and you then slot in actions, you slot in words based upon whatever the player did. This is terrible. It doesn't work. It's not funny, it's not interesting.
People
It's
do
boring.
this.
People do it, and it just does not work. So where does it leave us? We have a couple of choices, one of which is no narrative at all, and the other of which is what I would call player-generated narrative. Now, this is the Minecraft model. Stuff happens, and eventually you stop playing. You know, you do some stuff. You build a castle. Why did you build a castle? I don't know. I felt like building a castle. It seemed like a good idea. So I built my castle, and then I went and explored, and then did some other stuff. And it's cool.
Yeah.
There it is. There's your castle. You did it. Is there a story behind the castle? No, other than the fact that you built it. It's genius. Let the player do all of the storytelling. But there are problems with it, some of which is that the players, a lot of us want some kind of storytelling. We want to have something that gives us the feeling as though we're progressing through a thing. We want to have a beginning, middle, and end. Minecraft is not actually a game. It's a toy, which is great. It's a fantastic toy. We love it. But it's not actually a game. So what we like to think about is player authorship. This is where you get the player to do the work for you. You give the player enough of an outline, enough of a few things to work for, a few kinds of ideas, a few pieces of narrative, and then let the player fill in the rest of the details. And players are really good at that. So if you've ever talked to a guy who's been playing Civ, they will tell you how the game went. And they will describe all of the things that have happened, and they will give you a complete story out of it. And they will grow to hate Gandhi because Gandhi is a sociopath.
It's not his fault.
He is a total sociopath. But what we did, or what Sid Meier did, was he gave you enough character and gave you enough of a situation where the player could make the story up. And it's great. Well, it's not great for me because I suck. My story always ends up with me losing. But some people win, and they have a great time. And the great thing about this story is that the player wrote most of it themselves.
Yeah. I went with it. It's like, sure, music notes.
So there we have it. We got your narrative. Let the player take care of it for you. You provide a framework, have a short opening that the player is not going to hate after seeing 16 times. Provide some details, give a few character strokes. You can have your little situations, you can have your snippets and your chunks, but you have to always remember that you have no control over the order that the player is going to see them in and how many times the player is going to see them. So therefore have mercy on the player and make it light and easy and let them do the work for you.
And really, like, kind of put your own ego to the side with this. Like, Paul is actually really wonderful with this, and I'll be snarky about it. But, like, you are not here as a writer to tell your story when you're working in games. The player is a co-author in this experience with you. If you want to tell your story, go write a book or work in movies. You're in the wrong field. You really do, regardless of whatever you're doing, procedural or not, let the author be a co-author with you. And he's excellent at that. You should pick his brain at some point.
And pretty much because I would prefer it if they had to do all the work. And that's about it for me.
Now we have time
That
for
was procedural.
That was
Does
very
Dan want to add anything?
Hi,
Yeah,
Dan.
so really a few minutes left. So I'm not a designer.
Dan's our engine guy. Dan does graphics and makes pretty things.
So the kind of we were the entire talk, so I just didn't make a lot of slides because the content. One of the things that actually constrains games a lot that's not considered is that it's very easy to come up with brilliant game design that has some procedural element to it, but one of the big challenges is actually building the content for it procedurally. Okay. Well, I just think we just moved the mic. All right. So,
Musical chairs. Oh God, fine. Fine.
Over there. Go ahead.
Get back in the chair. Get back on screen. It's recorded.
yeah, this is being recorded.
I've said everything I want to say.
So one of the things to consider is that one of the biggest challenges on Civ 5 was actually procedurally making a map from an artistic standpoint that was, it's not random, but it's procedural, and trying to build it at a quality level that has to be competitive with other people's hand-built stuff. So one of the kind of difficult things about my job and also some of the stuff that we're doing at Oxide is that nobody, when they're visually looking at a game, they don't often consider the fact that like they'll compare you visually to games that are handcrafted experiences. So how do you build a visual experience that is competitive with a hand-built system?
Because in comparison, look at the Anno games. Those maps, those islands are handcrafted. They are gorgeous. Those mountains are beautiful. They'll randomly pick those handcrafted islands and put them down procedurally into that water. But those mountains, some artists lovingly built, and it shows. They're gorgeous. And how do you make something procedurally to rival that?
Yeah, so there's a compromise you have to make because at the end of the day, while what you're trying to prevent is the graphical world is you're trying to prevent the game designs making compromise based on visuals. So even though Anno has these beautiful visuals because they're handcrafted pieces, the truth is that Minecraft and Civ are far bigger games. Because once the player is invested in your game, they really care a lot more about the procedural nature of the game, the fact that the experience is truly unique and different every time, rather than the visual fidelity sort of will fall by the wayside after the first few months of playing it. So what you're really trying to do is make it look as nice as possible, but not tie the game design down because you want to make something visual. I think that one of our philosophies is that compromising game design because of visuals is generally a bad idea. And I think this is becoming more evident in the marketplace. Minecraft has been a huge success. Civ 5 was a huge success because the replayability was a really, really big aspect of it. So having said that, there are things that are going to happen in the future that are going to embrace procedural content. Our belief is that procedural content, procedural games, adaptive games that can keep adapting to your play and having new experience are the future of gaming. And this isn't just echoed by Oxide. I've talked to numbers of publishers, and they're not actually that interested in the single-player narrative anymore. Games like Horizon Zero Dawn are beautiful games, but the truth is that when you look at where the market is going, most games that are really coming big are not the single-player narrative experiences anymore. And they're also extremely expensive to make, and you also have the problem that like additional content is really expensive to make, so the market's shifting away. Now, some of these things they're talking about that are really hard to do, turns out that deep learning, how many guys have heard of deep learning? You know what it means? So deep learning is sort of interesting concept. Now, the technology is actually old. We're simulating neural nets. effectively that's what deep learning is doing, simulating brain circuits. But computers are never powerful enough until the last few years to actually do this for real. So deep learning is a way of training computers by using circuits that the brain uses to generate data. And it's extremely effective technique, and it's an extremely massive area of research. And it's particularly used right now for the creation of there's two kind of ways: texture synthesis, or creating something like if you want to create a terrain like something, and also image recognition. And the two kind of requirements to do deep learning are right now are large amounts of training data. So, and a lot of computing power. Well, we have a lot of computing power, so we need a lot of training data. So probably one of the biggest areas you're going to see deep learning impacting procedural games is that if you have a large game like Civilization that has tens of thousands of players a day, or hundreds of thousands of players a day, what you can actually start to do is use all the players in aggregate as training data to do things like training AIs and training what was good and bad. Like you could easily do thousands of map generations and determine which ones were bad and which ones were good, and then use that data to train the computer in very interesting ways. So that's going to be a very, very large area in the future, and right now barely tapped market. But if you want an interesting research project, that's a great area. And I actually do think that with deep learning, we will be able to do things like procedural narratives and various things if we can get enough, at some point when we get enough data to actually do it. The negative thing about deep learning, so deep learning is happening right now. One of the interesting things about deep learning is there's plenty of Star Trek episodes, which are sort of true, that you don't know what the computer's really learning. And with deep learning, these systems are so complex, they might learn bizarre things.
There was that Twitter bot that Microsoft
Yeah, the Twitter bot, and you get these feedback loops that reinforce behavior that might be bad.
Do you guys know about this?
Yeah, it's super racist.
Yeah, so like basically they put this bot out on Twitter, like, we'll let it learn from other Twitter users how to write tweets and how to be a good social media user. No, because guess what happened in less than 24 hours? It was the trolliest, most racist, bigoted bot ever.
But there's a reason why it was, and the reason is that controversial things sell.
Yeah.
It's the reason we have the president we do. It gets a lot of retweets, and so it actually learned that.
Yeah.
And it learned that was the most
Effective behavior.
The most effective behavior for getting retweeted was to do that. So
And I, for one, welcome our robot masters.
Yeah. So it wasn't.
Hi, camera.
It wasn't wrong. And there's another case where someone put in an AI to like optimize the game algorithm. This is pretty funny, and it turned out that the way they did the weighting algorithm, if it did a particular task, it would crash the game. And because it crashed the game, it didn't get a negative score. It optimized itself to figure out how to crash the game. And one of the areas I think deep learning will be most useful for is actually game balance. Because one of the hard things when you have these complex systems is to know if it's balanced. But the reinforcement algorithms are super effective at finding the most efficient solution. They brute force and learn from all the different experiences. So I think that one of the great uses that we'll probably try and use it for is, hey, let's put this game design, see if there's an overpowered strategy. Because what happens is we'll play.
Find those emergent dynamics, because you're not going to get all those yourself from testing. Nah, you need the large
There's too many.
data sets.
These computer games are so complex that if you want to keep it balanced, you'll find out running these algorithms that it will start optimizing for the most efficient thing, and often it's completely bizarre. Like I remember the early days of World of Warcraft, they had this was an alpha, they had the attributes were like +1 per attack, right? Constant per attack and things like that. So it turned out that like all the warriors had daggers because if +1 attack, obviously what you want is the fastest attack. So like, so you see all the warriors just like stabbing every single warrior because that was the most efficient thing, and that absolutely got changed pretty fast because, but the implications of making these rules, you can get these patterns that emerge that was not your intention, but turn out to be the optimal algorithm. So that's that kind of my sense on where the future is in the next 5, 10, 20 years. I also think that one of the things that will happen is that we'll probably do a lot of this procedural generation and through cloud clusters. So the computation will be too intensive to do at least the setup of a game on a local machine. So you'll slave thousands of computers together in the cloud, and it'll be very interesting, with the direction. and a huge area of research. The truth is that Oxide's custom built a lot of technology because there's nothing off the shelf that does any of things. There's no off the shelf package that's appropriate for doing procedural terrain. It doesn't exist. There's nothing that you could deploy in a game, so you're gonna have to build that thing. So it's hard. It's really difficult.
But if this interests you.
But if this interests you, yes. We are hiring, so
You can go to our website.
go to our website, and there's cards here. We're hiring for. There's a lot of positions listed, but we're also always generally looking for talented individuals, regardless of position.
OxideGames.com. There's a career page. You can also read about benefits, read up about Baltimore. It's awesome. Don't watch The Wire. It's lies. It's good. Yeah, well, we have just a couple of minutes. Does anyone have any questions for like the last 5 minutes?
Where are y'all based?
We're Maryland.
North of Baltimore.
We're Maryland, Baltimore, D.C. area.
Yeah. That's
Have you seen tool assisted gaming? Like usually it's in speed runs.
Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be sort of an advent of tool assisted gaming, like it's meant to be played with tool assistants or something like that? Because I think that is the way you program those things is procedural in a sense, I suppose.
Personally, I think there's a lot of application there for accessibility, and especially for like people with disabilities, like to help them to have a personalized, like, you know, where do they need help with? Like, are they missing a hand? Do they have limited eyesight? I think there's actually a lot of really interesting applications there. Because like while we can do a lot ourselves, like we can adjust for color blindness and like touch to help people with limited mobility, but we can't possibly cover every kind of disability. But with those kinds of like tools where that can be tailored and like procedurally changed based on the individual user, I think there's actually a lot of really cool stuff there.
I think we can create games that are much more interactable with the tools.
Mm-hmm.
And probably that's what's going to end up happening, is that they'll come up with some super-ass tools, and then people will start interfacing with them.
Yeah, I think what will be really interesting, though, is in content creation by players. So people will want to produce good quality content without the tedium or expertise, and I think that's the area that you'll really see this stuff paying out.
So, do you guys have any thoughts or kind of tips on how to prevent people from really gaming the system? Because I know that for certain games, when they have a dynamic difficulty event, just right outside the boss, you could go jump off the cliff 100 times, walk inside the boss, thinking you're a child, and so then you just wreck the boss.
Yeah.
So, is there any like tips you have that, or is it really just kind of play it by ear, see what happens, and hope your players aren't horrible?
No, you assume your players are horrible people, and they're going to find those exploits, and they will use them. No, don't make that assumption.
And also, don't try and get rid of all of them, because you know part of the fun in Skyrim was
It's finding them.
this is a really cool thing, and it's okay. Single player, you can do that all you
Single player,
want.
let the player feel
Right.
clever, because then they do. They're like, yeah, but
Well,
yeah,
that's-
multiplayer.
The one of the designers of Oblivion, Ken Ralston, explained to me very carefully. He was not a big fan of the dynamically adjusted difficulty, and he explained that the trick was to never let your character go to sleep, ever.
Because that's what it happens.
Because if your character goes to sleep, that's when it levels up.
Yep.
So he would have really tired characters running around because he didn't want to have to fight the bosses at level 50. You know, it was much easier to do that, and that, you know, you could say we got to stop that, but then again, it was kind of cute. It's kind of fun.
It really is like there is no like you must not, do not, must do. It's really what is your game, what are you trying to do, what do you want, what is the expectations of your audience, and just be aware that your expectations of what you need to do is not what he or she needs to do, and just there is no copy cookie cutter balance methodology. It don't work.
I have a question for Paul.
Yes.
Can you use the procedurally narrative to still give a message if you want to use your game to give a message?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of it depends upon the particular message that you want to give. And the thing is that it turns out that a lot of your narrative will be built in with the game design. Like, for instance, if you want to give the message that war is bad, then you make sure that however your game plays war, it's going to end up being bad.
For you.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Reinforce your narrative in your
Right.
mechanics.
But and the thing is that also one of the things I did not cover that I've seen done kind of well in with Stellaris, for instance, is that is a game that has that's procedurally generated, and then on individual worlds they have a bunch of short stories, which you can sort of going through research. You can see these little short stories that are given out to you in terms of the game. You know, reports from your scientists and those kind of things. But each one of those little chunks is a story. And over time, it sort of builds up and shows off the designer's worldview of the universe, while the main thread of the game is still, done through the player's brain. So that is a useful and fun thing. And the good thing about it is you don't really need to watch the story. So if you've seen it 16 times, you can just, go right through it. And again, that's letting the players make the decisions.
Any advice for, I guess, better forming negative feedback loops that, aside from just like testing over and over and over again and just tweaking it here and there, like what a general advice towards that?
What?
I said big hammers.
No, I actually don't like super binary things. Like, Blue Turtle Shell makes me really upset. I think it's actually a bit too on the heavy-handed side, but I understand why they did it for the kind of audience and game they were making. Like, personally, when I build systems, I never approach my numbers for anything by randomly inserting numbers. I know designers who do. They're like, well, this feels right to me. That makes, like, my brain hurt. Like, I build everything out of algorithms and formulas and have it spit numbers out at me based on, like, some base assumptions that I can then change based on data later to make better assumptions and get better numbers. So when I start to create or, like, contemplate where I need to consider negative feedback loops, I actually let my algorithms guide me to where those places are, like looking at where the regression ramp up is perhaps a little bit too strong. Where is it starting to actually, like, feed off itself? Okay, here's a place where we actually need to insert something to come back in. Look at your player strategy. So get together a group of, like, alpha testers, and then let them just, don't talk to them about, like, how to play. Let them just go discover some patterns. And then when they start to find those optimal strategies, that you have a problem. And that's where you need to start to insert negative feedback loops to destabilize those particular strategies. So, like, something with Civ, it's very easy in, like, in some ways to always expand outwards, because the more cities, the more land, the more resources, the more production capacity you have. So that's like a big positive for it. So you should just want to expand, because then you can produce more, faster. That's bad. So that's when you would start to put in negative loops. Like, well, then make expansion cost after a while. So, like, after a certain city, like Civ 4 was a little heavy-handed. After, like, City 4, was it? Punch in the face to your happiness. It was like, like in corruption. It was just like, don't build past City 4. But that was like, they did not want you to expand fast. Barbarians were another one. Barbarians roaming around as, like, little murderous hobo peoples. They would hurt you, and they stopped you from expanding too fast. It was a limiter put on that that strategy that players wanted to embrace. So really look at what your players are doing and not what you think they should be doing.
But
because what you think is how they play is not how they go.
one other thing to think about is think about who your players are
Yeah.
while you're testing. And what I mean by that is that you can end up playing with the same group of people
Yes.
over and over and over again,
Be careful about that.
and they get better and better. And therefore, you now think that that's the way all players are going to play, but it's not. It's your group that have been playing together and playing the way you've told them, or sort of.
I actually don't like having my alpha testers or, like, even know about each other. I don't like having that group thing where they can then, like, circle back around and, like, theory crafts and shit. I hate that. I like them to actually be soloed and siloed, and so then they're just giving me their own unbiased feedback irrespective of anyone else. I know there are people who disagree with me vehemently about that, but that is how I personally like to work with testing.
So one thing I think is super key in procedural that I did not cover here is that one of the keys to being as successful as, like, Minecraft or Civ is people play differently. And ideally, the game is such that it adapts different game styles in the sense that they're all, these different game styles, very different game styles are effective ways of playing. What you don't want to have happen is where there's only one really way. There's lots of choices that you could do. There's only, like, one way to actually play, and we want to avoid that. And to give you an example, one of the biggest problems with Civ is dealing with the fact that expansion and conquest is sort of naturally can be an overpowering thing. So Civ 5 had a number of systems to prevent that. There was a happiness curve that made it ineffectual. It didn't kill you, but it was ineffectual to expand. And that didn't mean you couldn't, but it meant that a player who chose not to could be just as competitive as the one that did. And I think that the trick with these negative feedback loops is I sort of prefer the negative feedback loops that cause diminishing returns. They don't cause you to, like, go into a death spiral. I mean, it's just like, all right, if you go from 3 to 4 cities, that 4th city just doesn't help you. You can do it, it just doesn't help you that much.
Yeah, we're never going to stop you from making an action, because that is
Yeah.
bad. Don't do that. Don't limit your players' actions.
But it does mean that when you're playing against certain AIs, when they take a city, they'll just burn it. because it's going to ruin their forward progression. So
This becomes an interesting narrative.
It fills you with
They
rage.
raise the city, and then you're a war criminal, and
Yes.
you're like, you're just Stalin. You're like, yeah, sure, whatever.
It's a,
Follow-up, is there an end to the chasing of patterns and eliminating the patterns?
At some point, you got to shift. You're never going to make it perfect.
Yeah, it's called that ship date. Yeah.
yes.
And also, you'll cut yourself in an endless loop if you're trying to close down every exploit.
Yeah.
Do not be perfectionist. This is also not the issue
Yeah.
for you if you're a
Right.
perfectionist. No.
And there is certainly a diminishing returns again of you start sucking the fun out in order to make your game perfect, and then you end up with a perfect game that's no fun.
Yep. So on that note, thank you for coming.
Yes.
Yay! If you have any other questions, we'll stick around for a wee bit. Come visit our booth tomorrow at the career fair. Yay!